With this build, we're going to lock down enemies with infinite stasis slows and freezes, become unkillable with a ×3 resistance, shatter everything around us, and have a grenade cooldown that's under 10 seconds. And if that sounds good to you, then make sure to sit back, relax, and consider hitting that subscribe button. Main feature of this build is the dust field grenade. It's a grenade that shatters on impact and leaves a volume, which will slow and freeze targets. We're pairing that with the Touch of Winter stasis aspect, which increases the size of the volume, as well as leaves a little stasis crystal on impact. And to take this even further, we're using the Renewal Grasp exotic gauntlets. This is going to give our dust-filled grenade an even bigger radius, and instead of a small stasis crystal, it's going to be a full-size stasis crystal that it leaves behind. There's a few things we can use this grenade for. One, we can use it to lock down an area to slow and freeze enemies that go inside. It's also really good against all types of champions. The slowing effect will stun an overload. You can freeze an unstoppable and shatter it, and you can just straight up put it on a barrier champion so they can't even get their barrier to go off. The other way to use it is more of a defensive way. You can throw it on yourself, which will still freeze enemies that enter it, but it'll also give you a damage resist while you're inside. And if any enemy is inside, you will receive less damage from them. So you're just extremely tanky. And on top of that, we're using Whisper of Chains Stasis Fragment, which while near frozen targets or friendly stasis crystals, you take reduced damage from targets. And all of these things can stack up to just make you an unkillable god while it's active. Now we are using the Verglas Curve exotic bow because it's an easy way to create stasis crystals, which is going to benefit us in a number of different ways. The way it works is when we get a final blow with this weapon, it will grant us a stasis arrow, and then our next hipfire shot will fire all of them in a single volley, and you can stack it up to 5 times, so you can get 5 stasis crystals. And if you have the catalyst for it, freezing or slowing a target will grant the weapon faster draw speeds for a short period. Now, creating and destroying stasis crystals are kind of the bread and butter for this build, because it's going to allow us a good amount of shatter damage as well as get our grenade under that 10-second cooldown time. So using the Whisper of Shards, shattering a stasis crystal temporarily boosts our grenade recharge rate. Shattering additional stasis crystals increase the duration of this benefit. So when we throw our grenade, it's going to create a stasis crystal, which we can kind of stand by it just to become even more tanky. But if we shatter that crystal, it's going to give us an increased recharge rate for 5 seconds. And if we shatter an additional crystal, it'll go up to 10 seconds. So by the time our grenade is done and we shatter a crystal, our grenade will have about 4 to 5 seconds recharge rate if you shatter an additional crystal. We're also using Whisper of Torment. We gain grenade energy each time we take damage from targets. So if we're sitting in our grenade, becoming super tanky and basically unkillable, this is going to grant us additional grenade energy to get it back even faster. So you can always just be sitting in your grenade because you can constantly be throwing it. And Whisper of Fissures increases the damage, size, and burst of stasis when you destroy a stasis crystal or defeat a frozen target. We can freeze targets and create stasis crystals quite a bit with this build, so this just increases the damage of that. And to pair with that, we're using the Shatter Dive stasis aspect. It's going to allow you to activate it while in midair to quickly descend and shatter nearby targets on impact. So the bread and butter for this build is to get a kill with your Verglas Curve bow. You can get as many kills as you want with it and stack it up to 5 times if you like, but realistically you only need 1 kill, so you can have 1 stasis arrow. And then you want to throw your grenade on an enemy or yourself, and you shatter dive into your grenade, destroying that crystal, and then you hip fire your Verglas Curve bow near an enemy. It'll create a stasis shard and it'll also freeze any of the nearby enemies, and you go ahead and you shatter that stasis crystal, and then you'll pretty much get your grenade back by the time your grenade ends, and you can just keep repeating this cycle and just have your grenade up infinitely. It also works for allies. When your allies enter the volume, they'll take reduced damage as well, and since it's a pretty big volume, it kind of works as a makeshift Titan bubble, but not nearly as good. And since we're locking down areas, keeping enemies frozen, we want to be able to shatter these enemies pretty quickly, so using like a shotgun or a fusion rifle is probably going to be your best bet. You can use the new Aramite legendary fusion rifle that you can get from Season of the Witch. I would recommend trying to get Envious Assassin and Controlled Burst, or if you really want to get a little wild, you can get Heal Clip and Reservoir Burst just to kill enemies, and when you reload it, it'll heal you and nearby allies. And then for your heavy, it's completely up to you. It's whatever you want to use to take enemies down really quickly and deal a lot amount of damage to bosses. For the rest of our abilities, you should use Gambler's Dodge to recharge your melee abilities, whatever jump you're comfortable with. And the Withering Blade fits into this build pretty well because you can throw one to slow a target, and if you hit them with a second one, it'll freeze the target. And freezing targets is super beneficial because you can shatter them. So it all works out really well for the build. The dodge also helps out with a lot of our armor mods, which we'll get into in a second. The artifact perk this season doesn't have anything related to stasis necessarily, but in that fourth column, you can get semi-auto striker. If you have fewer than 2 armor charges, rapid precision shots with bow, sniper, and scout rifles regenerate in an armor charge. So just shooting enemies from a long range with our bow is gonna allow us to generate armor charges, which is quite useful because you can use those for a few different things. As well, in that last column, rapid fire ranger, rapid fire precision hits against distant combatants weakens them for a short duration. It's a 15% debuff, so it's better than nothing, just helps out your overall damage. For your stats, focus on discipline and resilience, just to make you more tanky and have your grenade cooldown as low as possible. Now into our armor mods. In our helmet, we're using Stasis Siphon, create orbs of power from rapid final blows with stasis weapons. And since our primary weapon is a exotic stasis bow, we're using heavy ammo finder. It's gonna increase our chance of finding heavy ammo. And if you're playing with people, you should have heavy ammo scouts to drop heavy ammo for your teammates. In our arms, we're using grenade kickstart. When our grenade is fully expended, we're going to gain grenade energy. Bolstering detonation grants class ability energy when we cause damage with a grenade. Our grenade doesn't do a lot of damage, but it does a lot of damage over time if you throw it on an enemy. And impact induction, causing damage with a melee attack, reduces your grenade cooldown. So if you ever run into a situation where you throw your grenade and you shatter the first crystal and you can't create another crystal with your bow because you don't have one like already ready, just throwing 1 or 2 of your melees at an enemy will give you pretty much enough grenade energy back to get your grenade. In our chest, we have concussive dampener to reduce incoming area of effect damage and melee damage resist. I like to kind of play up close and personal, so I throw my grenade on enemies and I'll shatter dive into it, and then I'll just kind of play around in the grenade and keep throwing grenades. In our legs, you can use recuperation and innervation. So whenever we pick up an orb of power, we'll gain a little grenade energy as well as heal ourselves. Innervation isn't really necessary, it's kind of an overkill thing, but if we ever do run into that situation where our grenade's not up yet and we pick up an orb of power, it'll typically give us enough to give us our grenade back. For your weapon surge, if you are using the same weapon setup that I'm using, you should probably use a solar weapon surge for your rocket launcher and your fusion rifle. In our class item, it's important you have powerful attraction. So whenever you dodge, it'll just automatically collect the nearby orbs of power, which will do a lot of things. It will heal you, give you grenade energy, and if you're near an enemy, it'll also refund your melee. As well as Reaper, after we dodge, our next weapon final blow will spawn an orb of power, and Bomber, reduce our grenade cooldown when using our class ability. We're going a little overkill on refunding our grenade, but it's important we always have our grenade with this build. Just being able to infinitely toss out moon-sized planets that slow and freeze targets. It's super fun, and it's super good at locking down areas. So if you're running like Grandmasters and there's like areas where enemies need to funnel through to get to you, and you can just keep it constantly locked down by freezing them with a grenade, it's very useful.